very interesting topic we have here is the implementation of default arguments in pure C. But before that, we'll have to look at the example of C++. So what happens is, if in C++, this is a CPP file, if you can see the extension here, and if you have an argument, you can assign it a default value which would be passed. For example, we say 007, for example. And if we call this function without the last argument, for example, I say set bio, and I pass the first argument, I pass the second argument, which is age, I pass for 50, for example, and I just ignore the third argument because it has been given a default value here. This is a C++ function. We're going to just move on to C in a while, but first we need to see this example. If I passed all the arguments, if I pass 2 arguments, what is the difference? And it is printing those 3 arguments which have been passed here. So we'll just compile this, run this program, and we'll see that C++ allows us to do that. Let's copy the whole program and bring it into C, our C code, and see if it works. So let's copy the whole thing and bring it here. Okay. Now this is a C example. We are going to remove this so that you're not confused. So in C program, we are trying the examples that we usually get from the web, normal examples, and we do not understand them. Let's use a simple code here. Let's compile this, and the compiler is going to issue a warning. And this is, at the moment, it's the GCC. Let's try with the TCC. Does TCC allow in the standard C to pass the default arguments? No, absolutely no. It's not possible. So what you do to accomplish this, this stuff, you'll have to pass here. For example, I say this value, and I'll have to remove this from here. And then my function is going to work. I'll have to pass all the arguments. What if I want one argument or all the arguments to be skipped at a point of time? How would I implement it in C language? So what you need to do is create a structure of the same type against the function that you're calling, the very first step. Remember the steps and you would be able to do it very easily. You create a structure, type def, and a structure, for example, and let's name it, for example, we say bio underscore t. This is type. Okay, in here, we bring the arguments that we want in our function here. And because they are, because we are within the structure, we are not going to use a comma like that. We'll have to separate the types. Okay, fine enough. Let's bring them in one line so that we do understand that these are the arguments. Although they should be a new line, but we are putting them here separately so that we know that this is the first argument, this is the second argument, and this is the third argument. Fine enough till here? Now it is time to implement the actual function. This is the function, but with this name, we'll just add an underscore before it so that we later on create an interface. This is the very first step. I'll just write it down for you in the comments. First step, create structure as per your arguments that you want to follow or you want to send in this function. Now, remove these functions and pass an instance of a constant of the same structure that you have created. For example, you say, I created this structure, which is called bio underscore t, and its variable name is b, which should be utilized here. So we'll just print out from within the structure. So it's kind of a pseudo function. Actually, this is an actual function. This is an actual function which would be performing pretty much everything. And on top of it, this was the second step. Create actual function and pass the structure. Fine enough. The third, in the last step, is create an interface function, which would be having exactly the name that we want to call in our function. It's going to be a macro, very simple macro, and we'll say create macro. Fine enough. So what we do is we know already we are going to use define, and we'll create the function here, name of the function. And then what we have studied during our lecture about the variable arguments, we used ellipsis notation. Remember this? Using ellipsis notation. Fine enough. Till here, we are fine. Now, this macro should call the actual function and pass the arguments that have been here, that are passed here, to that function. So what we do is we call this function in here, and we need to cast the constant structure that we are passing, which is, we know that it is of type bio_t. Fine enough till here. Now, as we know, we can pass constant structure, constant array, but we have to cast it. We are passing a value, which is a constant value of the whole structure here. But this ellipsis notification, when used within the macros, will have to pass a constant defined by the C language, which is variable arguments starting with 2 underscores and ending with 2 underscores. And that's it. We're done. Do not leave additional spaces. I left for making you understand. We are done till here. We're going to compile the program, and it compiled just perfectly. So we passed 2 arguments here, and it is working, although it is expecting 3 arguments. It has 3 different fields. Now we can pass 1 argument, run it, it's just fine. We don't pass an argument, yet fine. So we are going to experiment it with all, because all the elements that are going to be initialized with 0 value, with empty value. So we're going to test if we do not pass anything to this macro that we are calling, assuming that this is a function, although it's a macro, and it's calling our function, which is which starts with underscore. It is of the same name, except for the function has the underscore in the start. Let's run this function, compile it, and run it. We'll see that everything is 0. All the arguments are 0. Now let's pass 1 argument here. Let me pass 1 argument here in the beginning, and let's see what happens. It printed out 1 in the beginning. ID has been assigned 1. What I can try next is I pass the age of the employee, and we will see that the 60 has also been printed. This is the third call, so it's going to appear in the third line. You can see here very, very clearly in here. So what we do is we pass the third argument, for example. Salary is 99.99, for example, or just 9. And we run it, and we see that this has actually passed the third argument as well. Fine enough till here. There's one more facility, you can call it a feature of C and C++ languages. When you pass a structure here, you can pass your selective fields. This is not equal to implementation of default arguments that are used in C++, but in here, you can extend your functionality further. And what you can do is you can just pass one field of your selection. That actually means you are passing a constant value of the structure, but with one field. For example, I say I do not want to add any field except for the salary. So I'll have to use dot here, because we know that we use dot to access structures' internal elements for structure as well as for union. So we will assign it a value of 777.77, for example. We compile the program, we run the program, and we see that the function has been called with only one argument. This is not possible in with default arguments, but in other languages. But it's possible if you do it using structure. You have passed only one field. The first couple of fields are added by default. They are 0. So this is the feature of C language. I'll just repeat it quickly for you. Whenever you need to create variable default arguments in a function, you create a structure. First you create a structure, then you create your actual function. Its name should not be the one that you're calling, but any name which would be called by the macro. So for convenience, it's best to add an underscore before it, or maybe 2 underscores, and then call it here. The third, you perform the operation here in the second step. Whatever you do with the structure which is being passed here, a constant value of the structure, and then you implement the macro. You pass ellipsis notation here. Do not leave a space here. You pass ellipsis notation here, and then you call the actual function by passing it constant value of the arguments using this constant varargs, which has underscore in the beginning, 2 underscores, and ending with 2 underscores within these curly braces, which means that this is excuse me, the constant value for our structure, in casting it to the structure. That's it. This is what you do. Secondly, there's one more thing. One good stuff is, for example, you have given a library to somebody and they do not know how to use it. And they mistakenly have passed a couple of arguments here, which were not necessary, although we were requesting 3 arguments only. But they have passed additional arguments. And because it's ellipsis notation, they did not understand it, or maybe you did not disclose this one or explained this structure to them or arguments to them. They have passed here. If you compile it with TCC, it's going to issue a warning that too many fields in the initialization. Of course, because we have 3 fields in the structure. But if you build your program with the GCC and turn off the warnings, I think you would be able to compile it. Fine enough. This is just compiled. So what did GCC do is it took the first 3 arguments and discarded the rest of the arguments which were not fit for the structure. We compile, we run it, and we see our program is working just fine. I hope you did understand this implementation. This is the best implementation of default arguments in C language that you can do. If you have any further question or you want to explore it further, let me know. I'll be explaining and answering your questions. Thank you. And yes, we can pass the arguments here of different arrangement. For example, we pass salary first, and then we pass .age equals to 60, for example. And then we pass the ID of the employee, which is here. And we say it is 90. So the compiler is still going to accept it just fine. Any C compiler, any valid standard C compiler is going to accept that presentation. you have reversed it, or whatever way you want to present it. For example, you say, okay, take the age from here, and age should be the first argument. You just cut this from here and bring it here, and fine enough. If you just go and see the output of the program, you will see that arguments have been passed properly with your presentation. But you'll have to use dot. Do not forget this one.